Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with our good friend, Professor Richard Conder. Following Brian Wilson's recent death, we're going to take a look at the life and times of the Beach Boys. I have to say, the Prof doesn't like soft rock. So, hats off to him for indulging me on this occasion. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Tony. You're looking great. It's good to
Well,
be back.
it's all makeup, everything, and everything else, as you know.
Has to be at our age.
It does indeed. It does. Richard, so let's start off with the Beach Boys, formed in California in 1961. And in my view, at that time, the American pop music scene was pretty poor.
Yeah, I think so. Very good point, Tony. All the originators of rock music and had disappeared for various reasons. Elvis Presley was in the forces, and when he came out making terrible films, Chuck Berry was in prison. The Jerry Lewis was in disgrace. Little
Yeah,
Richard had turned to religion. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And they were producing lots of manufactured music. Brian Hyland, Itsy Witsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Dope, whatever what it was,
it was it was rubbish, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, and it wasn't that good over here either. In
No,
fairness,
agreed.
yeah,
But I mean, we had to wait a little bit longer for the Beatles to roll up before the
yeah,
revolution started. But
yeah.
it's quite interesting, isn't it, to have so many brothers involved in a group like the Beach Boys were.
Yeah, it is. Isn't it? It is very interesting, and probably says something about the California culture, but and also the sort of the way people lived out on the west coast of America. But it's also interesting about how it doesn't always work out. We can think of lots of brothers who fell apart. We talked about the Everly Brothers before,
Mm, yeah.
Dire Straits, the Knopfler Brothers, Kinks.
Oasis,
They Oasis, absolutely. There's another good one.
violently.
Yes. So yeah, it's unusual to see so many brothers and cousins,
Yeah,
um,
with
but
just one
yeah,
friend.
they did. And one friend, yeah, Al Jardine, who incidentally is still playing Beach Boys music. When I'm doing some research for our chat, I came across some footage of him still playing Beach Boys music, obviously on his own, and still very active.
Yeah. It's incredible how these guys go on, isn't it? Because,
Yeah,
like everybody else, they're heading towards age 80 or past it. And
they are. Yeah,
so we go. But
yeah.
how would you describe the harmony? I mean, looking at all these brothers here, plus Mike Love and Al Jardine, is it a 5 point harmony or 6 point harmony?
Well, I'm not a great expert on that, but it's. I'd say well, I don't. I'm not a great expert. I'd say it was unique and very high quality harmony.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about it, and you mentioned that I'm not a great lover of soft rock. I think I think the West Coast, and if the white American popular music then had a long tradition of harmonizing.
Mm.
You go back to what they used to call barbershop groups, barbershop singing groups, and also, of course, a lot of California music is influenced by Mexico, which has
Yeah.
a long tradition of harmony.
Mm.
Um, Whereas I think the sort of music that I grew up on and you grew up had much more influence from the South, around New Orleans, and the East Coast, New York, and places like that, which came back, which massively influenced the Beatles and the Stones, who of course influenced us. So I think it is fabulous harmony, building on a long tradition of white popular music, country and western music. As I said, the barbershop groups,
Yeah.
barbershop
Yeah.
singing, and Tex-Mex music, as I used to call it, which is much more based on harmonies rather than 12 bar blues,
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
think is where my interest in popular music came from, and which was so influential over here. You mentioned the Beatles in the early 60s, 63 onwards, in developing the sort of British European pop music. So and that's not very good answer to your question. Is it 5 point or 6 part harmony? I can't really answer that because I'm not very knowledgeable. But I think the unique part of the Beach Boys music is their amazing harmonies.
Yeah. 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 And of course, coming back to this point you were making about white quartets
Yeah.
in the 50s, for example, there were four aces, four freshmen,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Four
Yeah. Full
Seasons
freshman.
came on board
Yeah.
eventually, didn't they? So lots
Yes,
of
there were
fours. Yeah.
lots
So
of fours. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
the Beach Boys actually moved out of the four principle into the six. So there you
Yes,
go.
they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So managed by their dad
Yeah.
initially, and
Not always a good idea, but yeah, managed by dad.
well, dad's
Another
got
way
to
of
get
falling
something
out.
for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? How all this oxygen is put into the fire on these things. It's
Yes.
all done with good intentions, but
Yes.
actually, it all goes wrong in the end, or tends
It
to.
always goes wrong. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, do you remember the surfing music of the time?
Yes, I do, and I remember. I don't think you. I do remember Surf and Safari. I certainly remember Wipeout.
Yeah,
And again, it didn't do great things for me. It was too. Yeah, I liked something a bit grittier, but I do remember those.
and it was the
So
signature tune to Ready Steady Go, wasn't it, for a few
Wipeout
years?
was, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah. In fact,
obviously,
I remember buying Wipeout, and then it did before it became associated with Ready Steady Go. But yeah, I do remember. I do remember that,
you actually
and all of
bought
that.
it.
Yeah, I bought it.
Still got it.
Yeah. Oh no, probably somewhere. That's my brother pinched it, but I said probably.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting, but it wasn't anything particularly
No,
special in
no,
my view.
no.
But there you go. And
Yeah,
I also remember that when the Stones did their first tour of the
yeah,
States, which I think must
yes,
have been 64,
yeah. I
63.
think it
We
was.
need Ali
Yeah,
McPherson here with us because he's the expert on the Rolling Stones. But anyway, they interviewed them when they came back to the UK, and Bill Wyman sort of mentioned, I recall this very clearly, that he'd
yeah,
noted that there was a very up and coming American group called the
yeah,
Beach Boys, and
yes,
whether or not that gave impetus to them, I don't know, but certainly it was my cue into sort of thinking about them, as it were.
yeah.
So first hit was "I Get Around."
Yeah.
That
Which
was
I
good.
remember. I do. Yeah, I do remember that. And I mean, they had. Again, I did. They didn't have a huge number of single hits in the UK.
No,
Nothing like the number they had in the States.
yeah,
Which again, I think. But I Get Around was one of them. And they were mostly focused around 65 and 66, which again was when um, that California theme of Summer of Love and all that sort of
yeah,
stuff was
yeah,
happening.
yeah,
I think that sort of music, uh, that very upbeat, happy, positive music that I would associate with the Beach Boys was influential and was popular. But they peaked in terms of commercial success, obviously not in terms of artistic success, around and briefly around about 65, 66.
yeah,
Um, they had a significant number of hits. Bob Ran, Help Me Rhonda, Good Vibrations, of course, Sloop John B. And then there hadn't been that many before, low sort of 30s and 40s in the hit parade, and there weren't many afterwards. And then they had that peak around then where they were both artistically, which they always remained, hugely influential, but also commercially successful in the UK.
yeah,
Their longevity in terms of commercial success was much longer in the States, as you'd expect, because I think California is a very big state. All of those, and of course the Western seaboard states are very influential, and I think they resonated much more. I mean, it's interesting, Tony. You mentioned Bill Wyman, and again, you said in your introduction that I'm not a great fan of soft rock, but some of the people you have to respect, like Jeff Lynne,
yeah,
um, absolutely rate the Beach Boys and compare the Beach Boys, put them alongside the Beatles, who Jeff Lynne had a lot to do with, very close to Paul McCartney. That's of course Jeff Lynne of ELO,
yeah,
and if he rates the Beach Boys, then he says their influence on popular music, the quality of what Brian Wilson and others produced in terms of harmonies, in
mm,
terms of taking popular music forward using the full range of studio techniques, electronics, and so on. Which again, I'm not a great fan of. I like music that can be played live and replicated live. But as I said, the Beatles, Bill Wyman, you mentioned, I've mentioned Jeff Lynne. Many people regard the Beach Boys as up there with the Beatles in terms of long-term influence. And you have to recognise that.
Inevitably, our mate Chuck Berry gets involved.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Shall we just tell everybody what happened?
Well, Chuck Berry, as always, getting ripped off by so many people. No wonder he was very often a very angry man. So, Surfing USA, which I did hear first of all, because I was, as I've already said, the black music influenced me much more than West Coast American music did. But I heard Surfing USA, and of course, I'd already owned Sweet Little 16.
Yeah.
And I heard this guitar intro, which so often, when white musicians were playing black music, sounded like a pale imitation, but it was clearly note for note the same as Sweet Little 16. But it was Surfing USA. And although now people write it up as saying Chuck Berry's given equal credits for it, he had to fight for that. Yeah. It was a long battle to get recognition for what in effect Brian Wilson had done. And I mean, the simplest thing to have done surely would have simply have been in touch with Chuck Berry or Chuck Berry's agents and said, we've used this and we're going to credit Chuck Berry with it and give him some of the royalties. But he had to fight for it. And I can't remember the history and I can't remember how long it took. But I seem to remember seeing the sheet music for Surfing USA, and it had no reference to Chuck Berry on it in the early days, and then later on it did.
But to me, yeah. Sorry, Richard.
If one, I mean, many songs used to have joint credits with disc jockeys and so on in terms of the writing, and a number of Chuck Berry's did. Yeah. And that was a price you black musicians had to pay to get their music aired. Yeah. Had to give some of the writing credits to the disc jockey who played it. So that wasn't what happened with Surfing USA was not unique.
I recognised it immediately. First time I heard it, I said, "That Sweet Little 16."
Yes,
there was no doubt about that from that point of view. But do you think, in retrospect, they did it because they thought it was a good melody, or they did it just to lift, basically come up with laziness by using somebody else's material?
You'll need to remind me when Surfing USA was published, but I think what we tend to think is a lot of that black music, we tend to think, because we all know it so well now, was well known in the States in the early 60s. It wasn't. It wasn't until the Beatles and the Stones came along and started to use Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Bo Diddley music that it actually started to be well known. And then we bounced it back to the States, and they started to pick it up. Before that, it had been fairly low down in the consciousness. You talked about the pretty awful music in the early 60s coming out of the States. They didn't hear a lot of that. And I suspect, to answer your question, Tony, is that they picked this up probably from some record they probably hadn't heard much about. Chuck Berry in those days. They heard this and thought that would be a great, and they just cloned it onto Surfing USA. And probably, I suspect, not too many disc jockeys and actually recognised it for what it was until people started to hear Sweet Little 16. I didn't hear about Chuck Berry until after the Beatles and the Stones. It was hearing them play it that gave me the intro to black music.
Yeah. Because I mean, we've got to remember this is the era of segregation still, which was American apartheid. And that didn't lift until 65, 66, was it? Something like that?
That was Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson's Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act that lifted that. And it still took a long while for, I mean, moving into a different era. You think of Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, as he was, fighting for rights, for black rights and so on. Yeah, that didn't really happen until the late 60s, really. The reality of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act didn't really become a reality immediately. So yeah, I think probably it was more a matter, a lot of that great black music, the blues, rhythm and blues, was only known at sort of peripherally, and it took the people like the Stones and the Beatles to bring it out. So again, going back to Surfing USA, I suspect it was they just heard this great riff and thought that would be great. We can introduce that
without
really thinking about too much about
just do the lyric.
Who else had heard it? Yeah.
Just do the lyric. I mean, talking about this question of discrimination, which obviously was a big thing in the States, always admired Bing Crosby and his association with Louis Armstrong there.
Yes.
He wasn't afraid to put his arm around the guy and give him a
hug. No. I mean, there were lots of brave white musicians and sports people who did stand up and would not play in front of segregated audiences. But I mean, there's another one. Nat King Cole went and played in the Deep South, I've heard, and got pulled off the stage and beaten up. So it's. I think now we don't realise just how difficult it was. But yeah, people like Bing Crosby and Louis Armstrong and so on. But I don't suppose we know the half of it, of what it was.
No, like. I'm sure we didn't. Anyway, better get back to the Beach Boys.
Yeah,
and I noticed that Glenn Campbell had a brief involvement with them.
Very brief, yeah. Was that? I think that was when Brian Wilson was unwell, and Glenn Campbell was drafted in. I mean, we haven't got round to Brian Wilson's battles with his own mental health and the stresses and strains he put himself under. But I think that was. I mean, you can understand why, because Glenn Campbell's voice and his music would quite nicely. I mean, it was about harmonies, these wonderful harmonies they created. So you can understand why, because when you look at the history of the Beach Boys, they did have a huge number of personnel changes over time.
Oh yeah,
people came in and came, and compare that, say, with another very long-lasting group like the Stones. I mean, the Stones have had personnel changes, but not many.
Yeah,
But the Beach Boys have had, for lots of good reasons, lots of people leaving, coming back, reforming, and people going off and doing their own thing. So again, I mean, I suspect that's all to do with this interfamily rivalry stuff, and which we talked about.
The usual stuff. Now, in 1966, they came out with Good Vibrations, which was a very technical piece of work.
Yes.
And of course, running parallel with Sergeant Pepper and things like that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Interesting how you got on both sides of the Atlantic, they suddenly progress.
And take music into a completely new era and new areas. Partly to do, I suspect, with great recording techniques and the electronics that became available. Probably great producers like George Martin and Brian Wilson.
Yeah.
But I think. Again, I mean, Sergeant Pepper knocked our socks off. I remember that. I was still at school then. Again, it was Pet Sounds, wasn't it? Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think so.
The LP. That didn't intrude on my consciousness in quite the same way, but I do recognise it now for what it was, that it was as groundbreaking and innovative as Sergeant Pepper was. But I don't think had the same impact over here in the UK as it did in the States.
Yeah.
But I think historically, now you look back and you're making a really good point, I think historically it is as influential. And that's what, interestingly, Jeff Lynne says that Pet Sounds for him was as influential and as dynamic and as interesting as Sergeant Pepper.
I mean, it was interesting. Somebody quoted, to quote somebody, I forget who it was actually, reckoned that Good Vibrations could be classified as a pocket symphony.
Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah.
And I said, I mean, I suppose in some ways you could say the same about Sergeant Pepper, or a pocket opera, I suppose. But you can say that. I mean, I don't recognise it for that. And some, I've again, doing research for our chat today, I had a look at the Billboard, the American Billboard. Their staff has rated the Beach Boys songs from 20 to 1, and not surprisingly, Good Vibrations, I think, is at number 1. But one or two of their staff who've rated them sort of compare Brian Wilson to Monet or to Beethoven. I can't remember exactly, but saying he should stand alongside them. I think that's overstated, way over the top.
Yeah.
But in terms of, because I think you have to be careful with popular music. Popular music is here, and it's popular, and then it goes, and something else comes along.
Yeah.
But unlike the great symphonies, which are there forever. But there's no doubt that now and again you get a change in direction, a change of technology, and great geniuses like Lennon and McCartney, like Brian Wilson, who can take popular music in a completely different direction and change it forever. I mean, actually, I play a bit of music myself, but not very.
You do. He's very good, folks, really.
But one of the things that I discovered reading about the Beatles, Paul McCartney discovered brand new chords. And I suspect, I don't know enough about Brian Wilson, but I suspect they did the same. He discovered new chords and introduced them into his songs, chords that nobody had ever used before, ever even knew that existed. Now, I wouldn't be able to play them because my fingers wouldn't be subtle enough, but they sound so different. If you're creating completely new sounds, a new chord or a new sound using electronics, then you will take popular music in the new areas. And I think that's exactly what happened with Pet Sounds, with Brian Wilson, and a direct parallel with Sergeant Pepper, I think. And interesting, although much of, say, I rate the Stones for their longevity and for some of their music and for bringing the black music into popular consciousness. But there aren't too many Stones LPs which you would put alongside Pet Sounds and Sergeant Pepper. Brilliant though they are, and they are brilliant.
Yeah.
Sticky Fingers and things like that, and they're still great to listen to, more so in some ways than Sergeant Pepper. But they weren't groundbreaking in terms of taking music in a direction like Pet Sounds, like Sergeant Pepper.
Now, they did an album called Smile that never got released.
Yes.
Okay. But apparently somebody put out a bootleg version, and it's the biggest selling bootleg album ever.
It's quite amazing.
Really
I have to say, I haven't got a bootleg. I've never heard it, I don't think. But
neither have I.
That dimension is extraordinary. And wonder who made all the money out of it. But it's and of course it broke Brian Wilson's health, didn't it? Really?
Yeah, I think so.
It was around that time.
Yeah, it was.
And because again, I think because he was a genius, but poor geniuses. So poor guy was didn't know when to stop, I suspect, and was using drugs in order to help him. Create music. Yeah, and Smile was a result of that, but also broke him, I think, certainly at that time.
Now, inevitably, the I can't even say it, Maharishi turns up, as he did for the Beatles and a whole load of... What was he up to?
Well, you've got to be very careful. I don't know what you say, I guess. But he was... well, I mean, it started.
It was
with George.
Mediation, wasn't it? No.
Yes, it was. Yeah. It started with.
Meditation, not mediation.
Meditation, not meditation. Meditation started with George Harrison, didn't it?
Yes,
and,
yes.
He encouraged the other Beatles to go over there, and he became highly influential. I haven't read enough about him, but I think there were a number of scandals. But we have to be careful what we say. But
without prejudice, alleged scandals.
Alleged, yeah. But I think alleged. Yeah. But I think I mean certainly the meditation part of it was influential in helping the Beatles.
Yeah.
To develop their spiritual side, and again they were influential in terms of the Beach Boys. If you think of George Harrison and All Things Must Pass, that was hugely influential by the Maharishi, and so in some ways you could say that was very positive in terms of making them think and go in a different direction. And there must have been positive influence on the Beach Boys in terms of where they took their music.
And indirectly, Ravi Shankar gets promoted, doesn't he?
Yes, and he was a very talented musician.
Yeah,
And again, we talked about different sounds and using different sound. I mean, his playing of the sitar was a genius. He was a classic and real musician, and introducing him into popular music, whether it was Sergeant Pepper or into the Beach Boys music, made a difference and
yeah.
took it in a different direction. So Ravi Shankar was a very, very talented musician. I mean, that I don't. The sitar just looks an extraordinary instrument. I don't know how anybody plays it. When you look at it and you see them playing, I mean, the talent is extraordinary. Not that keen, to be honest, on the sound, but
No,
but that's
we've had an interesting situation here in Alderney. Last week we had the Festival, Chamber Music
yes,
Festival. Brilliant,
yes,
organised
yes,
by Louise and her brother, and it was incredible because somebody brought along a lute. And
a lute,
how
yes.
they got it on the plane, I don't know. And I mean, you would marvel at it. I'll try and send it through to you so you can see it
Yeah, do,
sometime.
do,
But
yeah,
once again, that sort of gave a bit of an edge and made up for the
yeah,
lack of a harpsichord.
yes, yes,
So
yeah,
so it's incredible how stringed instruments can do this.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
they're end of the 60s, they're on their way. And poor old Brian Wilson suffering from panic attacks, mental health
yeah,
issues. And
yeah.
he more or less drifted away for quite a time, didn't he?
He did for a long while, and I think it was dependent on a lot of support. I think his relationships were difficult with his personal relationships,
Yeah.
um, and I think in some ways most people would have thought that was the end of the Beach Boys, that he wouldn't be able to come back because of those men. But I do remember them coming back in the 1990s and him playing, I think, over in the UK.
Mm.
But he didn't look like while he sat down at the keyboards.
Yes,
He
and
didn't look like he was really
no,
well
no.
when he was playing in the 90s. He didn't really look fully engaged,
Mm.
and but he started making music again and developed I mean, it was almost, I think you used the word resurgence. It was like a second opportunity for the Beach Boys to reach out to a new audience, and they did, but I think he wasn't well enough really to be
No.
doing that. I suspect. I think
You,
it
you,
probably he paid another price for it.
yeah.
But I mean, credit to him, he brought the Beach Boys music back into the consciousness of a new audience and into popular music.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, the reward was admittance into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, wasn't it?
Yes, which is, well, pretty remarkable. They weren't in there already in
Yeah,
some ways,
quite.
but yeah. Um, but I don't know what the criteria are for being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But I'd have thought the Beach Boys had met it in the middle '60s.
Yeah.
Didn't have to wait for the '90s, so I'm quite surprised they weren't in there already. But yeah, they certainly deserve to be in there. And but I didn't really feel there was a lot of new music coming out then. I mean, obviously they made new.
Mm.
Uh,
I wasn't aware
uh,
of anything. No.
yeah, yeah. Um, but again, I mean, if you compare them, say, we have been comparing with the Beatles. The Beatles had as a four harmony group,
Yeah.
four people, had a very short life
Oh, yeah,
compared to the Beach
absolutely.
Boys. I mean, they
Yeah.
never did come back. Obviously, the tragic murder of John Lennon and the very early death of George Harrison stopped that. But there was never really any serious intent that those four very talented musicians would come back. But these guys did.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
at least in an iteration which you could identify as the Beach Boys, they came back
Yeah.
and they performed again, and their music was still alive, and they reinterpreted some of their early music, so and produced new albums. So they had a longevity that
Yeah.
the Beatles certainly didn't have, and many of the other early early groups didn't have, that they broke up. So there was always something there that pulled them back together and allowed them to perform again. I mean, just imagine if the Beatles had still been playing like the Stones are, and like the Beach Boys were in their 70s and 80s. I mean, what would it look like, and what sort of music could they have produced, and where would they have taken popular music, which the Beach Boys did keep.
Yeah, very true. Now, we've had laughs in the past about brotherly quarrels, haven't we?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
but this
Yeah.
time it's a cousin on cousin, because Mike
Cousin on
Love
cousin.
sues
Yeah.
Brian for writing credits on 35 songs.
35. Yes. Yeah, extraordinary. And yeah, I mean, how do you prove that after
The foggiest.
all those years? I remember, sorry to go back to Chuck Berry, but Johnny Johnson, Chuck Berry's pianist, did that after years and years, lost his case. You don't need to tell me how successful Mike Love was in suing, but these things, they seem to happen, don't they? They seem to think, I guess when they're young and they're making music, nobody really cares. They're enjoying making music so much.
They're naive.
They're earning money which, although probably isn't the sort of money that they deserve, is money they would never have anticipated. And they don't worry about it too much anyway, because they're more interested in playing music and girls, I guess. And suddenly, years later, think, hang on a minute, I was involved in that. And as I said, that did happen with Johnny Johnson. I think he came to some settlement with Chuck Berry. And I bet Johnny Johnson did have a lot of influence on his songs. And I bet Mike Love did with Brian.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was successful or not, do you?
No, I don't. I rather suspect he probably was, because in 1998 he was granted an exclusive license to tour as the Beach Boys. So presumably that may have been part of the settlement.
Yeah, part of the settlement. I saw that, because probably he's the only one who could claim to be an original Beach Boy and could claim some credit for those songs. I mentioned earlier that I again, reading up for our chat today, that Al Jardine, the friend, is still playing and live and playing Beach Boys music, but presumably not as the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
Be nice if him and Mike Love got together.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so. Yeah, yes, he must have been. I guess, and I think I saw some of that. But probably was one of the quid pro quos in his suing Brian for that he was allowed to use the Beach Boys name.
Yeah,
because there's always a battle about these names, isn't it? The Animals had a huge battle about them. The Animals name. That was never resolved properly. So I guess that you're probably right that he was. That was one of the part of the settlement, that he was allowed to tour as the Beach Boys.
So Mr. Love is still touring at age 84. Mark and family saw them in Marbella a couple of weeks ago, and he said they were brilliant.
Good heavens.
Incredible, isn't it? Yeah, and he said Mike Love's voice was still very, very good.
Yeah, that is remarkable. And well, there's so many of those. They are still doing it, aren't they? Bob Dylan's on a continuous tour, I think. And, not sure about his voice, but he's still touring, because he's been over in the UK and been in Bournemouth. So it is remarkable these guys can still do it. I hope for us, Tony.
Well, hope for you, the rocking Prof. Finally, the Beach Boys record sales in excess of 100 million. So that, once again, comes up and proves Jeff Lynne's theory.
Yes.
On the whole
doesn't
thing.
It say everything? I mean, you started saying about me, I'm not a great fan of soft rock, and I'm not, and don't think I ever will be. But I mean, it's there, isn't it? 100 million.
Yeah,
there's enough people who are proper fans of popular music, who understand popular music. There's enough people out there who appreciate and value that music and buy it to say that this is one of the outstanding harmony groups of all time, one of the outstanding popular music groups of our lifetime.
Now, this is a question you'll know the answer to. Do these sales include the original vinyl, then the tape cassette, then the CD, and then back to another vinyl? How do they do it? I've got no idea.
I think it includes. I think it must include hard material.
Yeah.
Vinyl, CD, cassettes, vinyl. What I don't think it includes is downloads or things like Spotify. I
Yeah.
don't think.
No.
But somebody who watches this might completely disagree and say you're wrong.
Answers on a postcard, please.
That's true. Yeah.
Anyway, I think we're just about there time-wise.
Yeah, it's
As
really
ever, it's
interesting. What?
been a great
Yeah.
pleasure.
Other than, of
Thank you,
course,
mate.
paying tribute to Paul Bryan, who passed away so recently.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
That's a good way
yeah,
to finish it off, actually,
yeah,
Richard, by saying that.
yeah,
Yeah, very talented man and a
yeah.
very troubled man, I think, probably. But there
Yes,
we are.
I don't quite know how to express that really, other than
Yeah,
to say, it's one just hopes that he enjoyed his life and
yeah,
enjoy the recognition he got, because
yeah.
the troubled part of his life that does make you sad. Yeah,
Okay, well, it's been great to see you. Been great to
great
do
to
this
see you.
interview, and
Yeah,
we'll be in touch.
thanks, Tony. Great to talk to you too. Bye for
Cheers,
now.
mate.